I'm joined by Catherine Connolly and Thomas Pringle, who are both independent TDs. Thomas is from Donegal, Catherine is from out in Galway. Thank you so much for being with us. Can we get a round of applause for them, please? I'd like to read something, parenthetically, if that's okay, to both of you before I ask the first question. These are a number of headlines that I found last week while researching for this. So this is from the Irish Times in June of 1951. The future of the government is in the hands of 6 independents. This is from the Irish Independent that same year. Independents hold the key to power. Irish Times, June 1981. Independents and others to hold balance in the Dáil. Irish Times the following year. Government falls as independents revolt against budget measures. Irish Times 1998. The government will remain in office only so long as it keeps independents happy. Independent politicians in Irish life have had a kind of a disproportionate amount of influence, on how politics is done in this country. So I suppose to kick things off, I wanted to ask the two of you, let's say whenever the next general election is, and the numbers are there are talks going on to form a left government. What to you is non-negotiable?
You go ahead. Non-negotiable would be that putting people first would be the first thing. And also then, and what does that involve then? It involves making sure that there's representation for Donegal and for ordinary people across the country. Because what benefits ordinary people in Dublin will benefit ordinary people in Donegal. And also, as well as that, what we have to do is be very conscious of our stance on the world stage as well. And that would be in terms of supporting Palestine, doing away with Shannon as a stopover for the Americans and stuff like that there, because that's very important. And to get back to what Claire was saying earlier on as well, is about using Ireland's position and our history in a positive way within the European Union and to actually make a difference. And I think that would be very important. And but also then as well to get the balance right within the country too, and that balance would be working towards the benefit of everybody, not the benefit of the few, and that would be a big difference in Ireland. And could I just say, just in relation to you're saying about the disproportionate influence that the independents have had on politics in Ireland,
relative to other Western European
independents
countries,
haven't had as big an influence as the PDs have had, and the PDs have destroyed the country, and right. with the support of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael to allow that to happen. So independents haven't had that big an influence yet. Hopefully we'll have a bigger influence in time to come, and it'll be influence for the good.
What do you think, Catherine?
Well, first of all, Gurmil Magat the Suktan Kura Vehanshaw, thanks for the invitation. And I just want to say well done to the ditch, at the risk of getting even harder questions if I start by praising you. but you deserve that praise.
Thank you.
Just to echo what Thomas is saying here, I don't think independents have had that disproportionate effect on Irish society. And certainly I would agree with him totally that the Progressive Democrats were anything but progressive, and they encapsulated the neoliberalism at its core. So just let me say that. There are independents and independents, and I believe the last Dáil actually was the better Dáil. It had a range of independent voices. Unfortunately, Deputy Clare Daly decided to leave us, and in retrospect she was absolutely right, because we need her voice and the voice of Mick Wallace in Europe. However, Maureen O'Sullivan is gone as well, and so that range of independent voices, and Thomas was there and I was there on the last occasion, 3 are gone at least, and more. So I always said that was the better Dáil. The independents that are there now are a mixed bunch, and certainly they're part of the divisive situation that has occurred. Maybe we'll come back to that. What is non-negotiable for me? I'm never comfortable with the terms left and right. Let me just say that, to the displeasure of many. I think in simpler terms of what's right and wrong. And public housing on public land is absolutely non-negotiable for me. The hypocrisy in relation to public housing disgusts me, actually. So public housing on public land, public health, absolutely non-negotiable. Public transport as an integral part of our actions to deal with climate change. And of course, no troops through Shannon. Our neutrality is absolutely non-negotiable. There are others. I wish the left would come together on the non-negotiable aspects we've tried in the last government, myself and Thomas. Sinn Féin weren't actually queuing up to talk to us. They went through the procedure of talking to us, but we never got to the point of, not everybody will agree on everything, but for me there are somewhere between 5 and 10 non-negotiable positions. If Fianna Fáil in its wisdom was to agree to that, well, there you are, they haven't a hope in hell. But I'm not sure if the parties on the left are ready to do that either. Well,
there are other left-wing people in the Dáil historically. In 2004, I believe it was, Bertie Ahern famously described himself as the last true socialist.
How right he was.
You all laugh, but Charlie McCreevy agreed with him, so... Okay. So I suppose what I'd like to know is, in the context of kind of Irish politics as things stand, how amenable has the political establishment been to, any sort of progressive things that you've put forward, Yeah. Whichever one of you would like to answer that first is fine.
And the current Dáil, they're not a bit amenable.
Or even just since you've both been TDs, it's fine.
Well, I mean, I actually, the last Dáil was useful in terms of, in the last Dáil, I got the fossil fuel divestment bill passed in the Dáil where
all on your own.
All on my own. It was nobody else. that was important, but that was because we had a minority government. If you put that bill forward now, if any member of the opposition, whether they're Sinn Féin or independent or whatever, put this bill forward now, it would be voted down straight away without even thinking about it. And that's with the Greens and there as well. So because the numbers dictate. And in the last Dáil, the government didn't have the numbers. You had a minority government, so they had to be more open to ideas coming from the opposite side as well too.
So even with a left-wing party like the Green Party in there, we can't. Catherine, the same question to you.
It's whether you succeed or not succeed. It's really important to have a range of diverse voices, and we have had some successes, which I'll come to. But there are other successes that you can't actually enumerate, like giving people hope. I was struck by the president of the Students' Union that talked about having faith against the apathy. And that's extremely important. The imbalance of power has always been there. Always. Society has never changed, really. I think the foolish thing is we thought it had. And so what you need are voices to go on articulating that there is a different vision. There is a different way of doing things. And so that's extremely important, for example, in relation to Gaza and Palestine. To stand up and articulate that, to articulate, as Claire has done and Mick Wallace, in relation to the Ukraine when it was extremely difficult. And I've had the privilege of being in the chair and outside of the chair when I've heard the various slurs thrown by the Taoiseach, the Taoiseach and all the others, Putin's puppets. And getting away with that on my watch, that particular one, so I take responsibility for that. But reducing the dialogue to that it captures where we are. There's this cosy consensus, but it's always been like that. I spent 17 years of my life on a city council, and the first, I can't remember many years, it was get the vote over with. You know how those two are going to vote. At that time it was 13-2. I was a member of the Labour Party, and we put up with that. We had some successes. So come back into the Dáil. We've been voices for different things. We've stood up for Palestine. We've asked for peace to stop the crazy war in the Ukraine, which is going on with a deliberate purpose. It's been choreographed to justify the arms industry and to justify them and us and the rogue states and all this type of language that minimises and reduces our intelligence to just zilch. On a more practical level, we put a policy for the islands. It was in my name and Thomas's name, and we got. There's never been a policy for the islands in Ireland. We're an island nation with a lot of islands, huge potential, an absolute example in sustainability. No policy. We finally got a policy. It's not based on legislation yet, but we've got it. We put a spotlight on maternity, the strategy, maternity strategy. And we're way behind theoretically. A great strategy. Has it been implemented? Absolutely not. And we did the same for seaweed. We've done the same for wool. We've tried to put a focus on indigenous industries. Huge potential in seaweed and wool. And we've tried to put a focus on balanced regional development. Dublin is just developing out of all proportion. I like Dublin. I prefer Galway. But there is no emphasis on regional development. And I'll finally just finish on this. Language has become meaningless. And I despair when I see the front of the papers talking about we have to counter the disinformation coming from the rogue states. Most of the disinformation is coming from governments in a particular manner. That's where it's coming from. And language doesn't mean anything anymore in the Dáil or outside the Dáil with the vast majority of politicians.
Would it be fair to say that politics is we keep hearing from, government that politics is becoming a kind of a nastier, scarier place. Do you think that that's true, and in what sense is it true?
I suppose with the growth of the right and stuff like that, there it has become a bit more aggressive in that in terms of how politicians are dealt with by the public, and that is a problem, I think, because even though how much you might dislike somebody on the right of that there, or somebody in Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael, it doesn't attacking them physically or stuff like that there isn't justified. I don't believe, and that is a problem, and it has become more and more over the last while. In terms of my own personally, I don't think it's changed in that it's got very frustrating, because the only way that you can really change things is by being in power, and that's a problem. And so therefore, for myself and Catherine, I know we have slightly different views in relation to this, but if you want to make real change, I think you have to be empowered to make that real change. Now you can, by being independent and by voicing what you're putting down, you can have an influence, but you won't really make that real change. And that's where we need to go, and I think that's where, and I think it should be that the parties should be looking to us rather than us looking to the parties or anything out there, because we'll make the difference. And
you'll be waiting.
You never know, but and the one, I think the big problem that we have at the minute is that with the rise of the far right and stuff like that, there you have actually the centre ground is moving right. And the centre is becoming more and more closer to the right. Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, and indeed Sinn Féin are moving to that direction. So the right is moving, the centre is moving right, and that's a big problem. And I think that's something that's going to be cause problems in the years to come as well.
Yeah, there's more and more ground being ceded to the kind of extreme right, the far right, whatever you want to call them. You see it even in the rhetoric of, so supposedly respectable politicians, people like Simon Harris. He described a number of tents along the Grand Canal. He said they were festering, right? You're talking about people here, right? Why is it, do you think, that this kind of extreme form of politics has been able to gain ground in Ireland, given that historically it has not been able to?
They haven't the guts, the politicians haven't the guts to actually stand up and say what's right. And actually to oppose that. They should be opposing that, but instead you see them all running to pick up slightly less versions of it, so that they can be seen to be on the same side. And I think that's the problem. They just simply haven't the guts.
I think a vacuum has developed in Irish society for a very long time. I'm on record for saying the Labour Party lost its soul a long time ago. And I don't mean that in a personal, vindictive way in any way, but there was nobody to lead at all in relation to an alternative vision. And when they sold their soul, they left a vacuum into which Sinn Féin has stepped over the last number of years with some good policies. 2014, there have been many turning points, and one of them was 2014, when we completely did away with any chance of housing as of right. In 2014, legislation was brought in by Fine Gael and Labour, which encapsulated this phrase, housing supports. And they brought in the housing assistance payment, which between that and other schemes is almost 1 billion a year at the moment into landlords' pockets. Now that's bad enough, but they brought it in as the only game in town. So with one piece of legislation, they took away any chance of beginning to work to bring in housing as a basic human right. That's one example. That's still there. And on top of that scheme, they brought a whole myriad of other schemes. And what have we? We have almost 14,000 people homeless. We have a major crisis. And then into that, although we're spending, I think, courtesy of Cliff Taylor in the Irish Times, 8.3 billion per year on housing, 8.3 billion per year on housing, and we have a major housing crisis. And into that, along with a public health crisis, a public health in the public health after COVID crisis, we saw the headlines today, hospitals, Limerick not functioning as a hospital, Galway at breaking point. None of that happened by accident. And so in that vacuum then, we have innocent people coming into our shores looking for asylum, into a system that's not functioning effectively, a system that we've all agreed is not fit for purpose, and we had the Catherine Day report and more reports after that to stop direct provision. Then bring in 100 and something thousand Ukrainian refugees, but give them a different title, treat them differently, create a two-tier system, possibly a three-tier system, and so on. And you are creating the situation where you're handing a gift to the right. You're handing a gift to the right. And to me, it's all been choreographed. And so you think, am I one of these conspirators? I'm anything but. I come from a very large family. And there's a lot of people to keep me grounded on the ground in case I get any notions or any ideas of. And so, to me, it's been absolutely choreographed. And if you remember Naomi Klein and all the books that she's written, and the neoliberals never waste an opportunity. And so we're in a constant state of crisis. And one can't think, I'm privileged, I'm earning a good salary, and I have a voice, but I have to remind myself every day to use it. Because you despair at nothing changing, and then you realise you just have to keep going. You have to do it and try and empower people on the ground and get that movement from the ground up, because nothing will come from the top in this country. I can tell you that. Absolutely nothing will come from the top. But it has to come from the bottom, but not in a divisive manner, in a manner that allows us to say we cannot have a civilised society. We are not a republic if we don't have housing as a basic human right, public health as a basic human right, and so on. I'm repeating. I'll stop myself. Yeah.
Now, on the Labour Party, who we did invite, they're not here. Listening, I remember listening to Alan Kelly, AK-47, as he's known, on the Irish Times political podcast, way back when Labour lost all their seats in 2016. And they put it to him, like, why is that? Why did that happen? And his position was, well, the Irish people are ungrateful for what we did to them, or did for them, excuse me.
He's known for his self-reflection.
But, Thomas, you mentioned that, you can't get anything done if you're in power. So, is there any... the Labour Party aren't here to defend themselves. I suppose I'll...
So what?
They would say, well, it could have been way worse. What do you think of that kind of political thinking, particularly from a party that, says it's of the left?
It actually couldn't have been way worse, because the Labour Party actually allowed Fine Gael to do what they did during the bailout and everything like that, because the Labour Party quietened the unions and kept the unions happy and kept the Fine Gael to go do what they did. So I think it would have been totally different if the Labour Party had the courage to stay out and actually fight on that basis. But how things can change, I think that what they call the permanent government, politicians always talk about the permanent government are a block to doing anything, and the EU as well is another block to doing anything. But the permanent government will go along with whatever the political system says, and particularly I think if the legal view of the political system is that this is legal and this can be done, and that's why it's very important, and that's why I think that in government negotiations the key position would be Attorney General. And that if the Attorney General has the right legal view and can put that view across, and plus the Attorney General will permeate across all departments, and so that's very important. And if you have that backing, in what you're doing, the permanent government goes along with it. I think that's vitally important, and that's why I think that you can't change anything one department at a time or anything like that there, because that won't happen, and you can't change anything with Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael either, because it definitely won't happen. They're not about change, and but you can if you have the right way and the right way of doing it, and you want to go in and make that change. And I think you can force it to happen, and I think that's the value of what I think a proper left coalition after the next government, after the next election, could deliver, if it's done right. And it can't be about just satisfying, saying we'll sort out housing and everything will be grand, or we'll sort out this and everything will be fine. That's not going to be what it's about. We have to sort out housing, we have to sort out health, we have to sort out transport, we have to do it all, and we have to make sure that it's put in place that that's all going to happen, and work to make that happen.
So we need a socially and economically progressive Attorney General. Will you bring back Alan Shatter? Catherine, you have a legal background. Would you consider doing that kind of a job?
Well, I mentioned it to Catherine before that she should take it.
I was actually trying to remember where I was going with the previous point I made.
Avoiding that one.
And like all good politicians, I'm going to avoid all questions that I don't want to answer. I think, the word watershed has been used many times. I wish it was a watershed, but what Claire has said, I'm not so sure it is. I was coming up today and I re-listened this morning to World Report in Canada. And Canada, it's worth, because it's the same language now all over the world, except for the rogue states. And the rogue states, we know, are Russia and China, and anyone that doesn't agree with the narrative. But Justin Trudeau this morning, a renewed vision to defend ourselves. We have to be able to defend ourselves on ice, land and air. He's now going to increase spending nearly up to the 2%, but not quite, that NATO wants in relation to spending. And all for what? To develop the values, of democracy, freedom, peace and fairness. So we've turned language completely on its head, and what we want, strong and free policy. And I'm thinking, that's the language we're listening to all of the time, from the Taoiseach, from the Taoiseach, to defending the rules-based. And Ed Horgan, in one of his many letters to all us politicians, amongst the other good people on the ground who keep us educated, asked, what rules are we talking about? Whose rules? And where has the UN gone to? And where has international covenants gone to? And human rights? How do we talk about a rules-based society without a framework? And then you say, if all this language is exactly the same over and over and over. And I just thank Claire in Europe and Mick for exposing this, for having the courage to stand up repeatedly to expose it, because it really is difficult to keep standing up and doing that. And it's the measure of the venom in the various articles expressed against Mick and Claire, of the damage, not the damage they're doing, of the effectiveness of what they're doing in exposing what's happening in our name throughout Europe. And that spending on arms is just frightening. Can you imagine if we were using a percentage of that to eliminate poverty? I mean, they've made sustainable development goals, 17 of them, irrelevant. They've made climate change irrelevant, because it's the arms industry and the ongoing wars is the elephant in the room. And so while we focus in on carbon tax, we're going to recognise Palestine when it's blown out of existence. And so we need more and more voices. While we're waiting for the left to take over, we need voices to stand up on the ground, in the Shannon, in the Dáil, and anywhere we can. When utopia comes, when the left get in, I look forward to that. But in the meantime.
Why do you think the government was so keen to, kind of express, solidarity with Ukraine, and its expressions of solidarity with Palestine have been kind of weak in comparison?
It's because our European masters are saying that we should be supporting Ukraine, and one thing Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael don't want to do is piss off our European masters, and that's what it is, And I think the Ukraine is horrific what's happening there, but I think it has contributed, and I think if there wasn't a Ukraine war, the Israeli attacks on Gaza wouldn't be as opposed, I think, because people have seen the contradictions. and how the government looks on Ukraine and how the government looks on Gaza, and people's minds and all our minds, and it's true. It's the exact same thing. People are dying, and it's war and it's wrong, but the people have seen the hypocrisy and the views and have seen the hypocrisy and how that's been dealt with, and Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are being dragged, kicking and screaming. And I know Albanese said that Ireland isn't doing anything and it's only words, which is true, but they wouldn't even be doing those words if it wasn't for the people that have been out protesting every week and every day, and there's protests in Donegal every week, and that they're in support of Palestine, and people are talking about it, and that's putting the pressure on it, because it's Fine Gael voters and Fianna Fáil voters that are doing it as well, and that's putting the pressure on the government, and that's forcing them to eventually, probably when they recognise Palestinian statehood, maybe in a couple of weeks' time, when they're saying the choreography is all going to come together, and that's been forced on them, and they don't want that, and that's the power that people have in terms of, and the more that people realise that, the better, and it makes it easier then in the Dáil as well to push them when that power is outside as well too.
I agree with that. I think the protests on the ground, often people, and I know more myself as well, feel powerless, but the protests on the ground have made a huge difference. Not to the people that have died, unfortunately, but it has made a huge difference in keeping the pressure on, because the narrative has changed slightly from our leaders in relation to what's right. And just yesterday I was at a protest in Galway. The night before I was at a packed concert, the alternative to the Eurovision, in Leisureland in Galway. And it was the most amazing array of performers, lots of them from Palestine, through Lebanon, and so on. So it's one thing that has given me hope, although it's hard not to despair with the amount of deaths. And as we speak today, the slaughter is ongoing. I'm afraid it would have been worse. And it will get worse without ongoing protests. And you have made a difference. I would agree with Thomas.
There has been a coordinated campaign, particularly I think since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, to kind of degrade Irish neutrality. And we've seen the government do things like sign us up for permanent structured cooperation, for the NATO-ship partnership for peace, which is we talk about language not having any meaning. And in the media too, you get people saying, like, we need to grow up, is what we hear a lot, I'm a political correspondent and I go to Brussels. Everyone's going to laugh at me unless we have 10 fighter jets, so we need to buy them, right? So I suppose, what can a left government do to protect neutrality, in terms of actual policies, and sort of undo the damage that's been done already?
I had the distinction, Bridget Laffin, I think, told me to grow up lately, because I dare to say we might need an army. We do need defence forces. The hint is in the word defence. We don't need an army, and we certainly do not need a European army. And if we go back, there's been a concerted effort to do away with our neutrality. And it's the one thing that Irish people hold dear. It even came out in the Consultative Forum, despite the Dame's best efforts to make sure it didn't come out, Dame Richardson. Is that her right name?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, maybe she has a higher name. Yeah. That's her, yeah. And they've done it, they've been very clever, really, in the way they've done it incrementally. So we go forward, we'll take Nice. We had to vote twice, and they put in the declaration. Then Lisbon, the exact same. Now, I canvassed against Lisbon primarily because I foresaw what was happening on the streets of Galway. And I remember standing by somebody with a Yes T-shirt on, who'll remain nameless, a developer. And I asked him, had he read the Lisbon Treaty? Don't be wasting your time doing that. So he was out canvassing for a yes, quite, forcibly. But I did read it. Besides the neoliberalism, which was absolutely jumping off the pages, we were committing to a military-industrial complex. And all the lies that were told about that. So here we are. We're only lately, the programme for government and the election manifestos all said we'd keep Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, the Green Party, we'd keep our neutrality. And they're going to bring legislation in. We had the first part of it last week as a trinity of legislation. So the second piece, I think, is going to get rid of the triple lock. And you know what's funny, actually, they kept saying we were getting rid of it because of the use of the veto by Russia. And never once was the American veto ever mentioned in all of this, who repeatedly have used the veto to suit their own purposes. And it's a frightening concept. To me, it's a frightening thing that's going to happen unless we wake up and move from the ground up to say, don't do this. And to stand proudly as an independent, sovereign state, a republic with republican values in the best sense of the word. And our strength will never be with an army. Our strength is to show a different way. And peace will only come by working at peace, not by military, building up the military-industrial complex. I've lost the ability to understand the money. We're up in trillions worldwide in relation to what's been spent. I've lost the ability even to retain it, to hold on to it. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to commit to 2% of our GDP, which we know you can't rely on the GDP in any sense as being an accurate indicator of what's happening and so on. I could go on forever about it. I won't.
There is this perception that neutrality is a passive thing, and that we're kind of sitting back and we're not playing our part, as though
free riding, I think.
Yeah, I mean, Ireland was the first country to sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty, right, with Frank Aiken. So, in terms of being a neutral country, I mean, how do you see Ireland operating on the global stage if we actually had if we managed to protect neutrality?
Well, I think what we could do is if we were going to be proactive as a neutral country, we could be that voice between the third world and between the European continent and that there as well, because we are one of the only former colonial countries that is a member of the European Union. Also in Greece, I think probably from the original countries. So that's a hugely different perspective. And so that actually, if Europe was sensible, they could learn a lot from us, and they could use us as being that bridge as well to the third world, and I think that would be vitally important. And I think whatever happens, whatever left government comes in, the first thing they would have to do is repeal this legislation that's going to be passed in the coming weeks, because it is going to be passed. And you'll see that probably the government will bring forward this legislation to do away with the triple lock, probably around the first week in July, when the Dáil will be rising the following week, and there'll be no time for debates or discussions or anything like that there, and it'll be railroaded through, and they'll go along with it, and that's the worry. And so what we have to do, we'll have to have an agenda to set to repeal that legislation in the next Dáil when the left government takes power, because the people will have to force the parties of the left to make sure that happens as well, because a lot of the parties of the left are enamoured with Europe as well too, and that's a problem as well. They won't criticise Europe, they won't be Euro-critical, and that's something that we have to do. And I think we're failing ourselves, and as Claire said, we're failing all the people of Europe as well if we don't stand up and say this is wrong and this is not the way we should be doing it, and we should be that voice. And there's nothing wrong with being that voice within the European Union as well, and saying that this isn't possible and this isn't the way that things should be done, and that we should be that voice, and we should be proud to be that voice. And and we don't have what do we have to offer? The only thing that we have to offer to any European army or anything like that is manpower, and that's what will be given. It will be Irish people dying in Africa for German and French colonial interests, and that's all that the European army will be for. And I don't think the Irish people want that, but I think the Irish people are going to have to make that very clear, and they're going to have to send that very clear message to all the politicians that they don't want that as well.
Maybe something like a referendum on neutrality might be...
we were promised a citizens' assembly on it. That went by the board as well.
We're out of time, unfortunately, for this talk. I want to thank both of my guests for sitting here and speaking with me. It's been great. Please get a round of applause for Thomas and Bertie. Thank you so much.